idea what time it is.
Close enough. Got a phrase Jimmy Buffett this morning somewhere.
It's somewhere.
I'd like to call this meeting of the Oconee County Planning Commission to order at 6 p.m. Thursday, September the 6th, 2018. Our first order of business is invocation by our county chaplain.
Pray with me if you'd like to. Creator of this big, beautiful universe and us little people who sustains both and guides both and directs both, I pray for you to give us that wisdom and direction this evening. All together playing our roles can better serve this community. But also thank you for our country. And freedoms, liberties you provide to us.
Amen. Ms. Wynn, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, y'all all have a copy of the minutes. Do I hear a motion to approve?
So move.
Or second?
Second.
Any corrections or any discussion about them? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. It
Can
looks
I
like-
say, as part of these minutes, if I could interrupt, I'm sorry, since the minutes are just being adopted, I noted in the minutes it captured my sentiments about Highway 11 and the ability to place a billboard or not on that sign, where Mr. Pearson stated that we could not by law, and I said that according to my most recent recollection of the law, you could unless it was accepted. Further research by Mr. Chapman that I followed up on, I believe I am incorrect. Mr. Pearson was correct, and so bow my hat to him. Mr. Chapman, follow my sword, whatever I need to do. That is being conveyed to council as they take up the sign ordinance on the 11th.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we have public, we don't have anybody signed up for the public comment on non-agenda items. We'll go right into staff update.
Certainly. Just a brief one. In the last 10 years, we've had 1,600 new parcels created in the county. So it's been a pretty fairly steady growth rate over the last 10 years of new parcels and 63 subdivisions.
Budget of 2-61.
Mr. Markovich, you have another job. That's all I have to staff update.
Okay, item number 7 is the 2020 comprehensive plan and quarter plan. Mr. Adam?
Certainly. So I provided a couple pieces of paper regarding it. So first of all, locations. We're looking at some meetings outside of here. Those are the ones that I emailed you all, and you all sent me back a couple options here. But other than that, do you have any other, I don't know this county as well as you all do. Do you all have any other places where we could have public meetings at?
Is there a clubhouse at Bayshore? Because I know Bayshore and that part is in District 5. I don't know if maybe there's a clubhouse over that way somewhere, or maybe a fire department that we could use over that way.
I don't know where Bayshore is, but Chickasaw Point has a little clubhouse.
I think Chickasaw's probably in District 4. District 5 does not have that many accessible places, I don't believe.
Yeah, so for firehouses, I did talk to Chief King and Captain Crime, Mr. Crime, and so some of the firehouses don't have public places, and even though if they pulled trucks out, they wouldn't necessarily be all-weather places if it's too hot or too cold, but they are accessible for us. There are a few firehouses that do have some meeting spaces available for us.
Florence Shiloh would be in District 5, I think, if they have anything.
What about the church out on, is it 183, out next to the dollar store? the big church there on the left,
You gotta tell me where 183 is.
like you go by Yoder's and all, that would be District 5, would it not?
183 is
And I don't know if
nowhere
that's
close.
That's
183.
243.
Whatever that road
That's
is,
243.
what is that road that goes down?
It's 182.
82. Yeah, I was
182.
close. Anyway, but it's where the Family Dollar store is and right across that big, right there next to the
Beaver
post
Dam?
office.
Beaver Dam?
I'm not sure what the name, maybe.
So, right, so this is my consternation as well, so if you all, I sent you all an email about it, if you all think of some more places, even better if you happen to know someone there, that's great. If not, just give me some, like, for instance, those Bay Shore Clubhouse, I'll look in to see if those are available options. So please just keep feeding me those, if you all have any thoughts.
Can you tell me if Earl's Grove is in 4 or 5? The line's really close down through there somewhere, because I could get our church.
4 and 5.
probably, but I don't know which one it is.
It's supposed to be fumbling around with the website, I'll get back to you on that.
Oh, I think Fair Oak
So,
Church is in 5,
Earl's Grove.
but the other end of Earl's Grove is, but the other end of the road is in 4. Because my mom lives on that road and
Earl's
They're in-
Grove's
I
in
think
4?
59
They're
is the
in 5.
dividing line. I almost think Earl's Grove is in 4.
Her house?
Okay, wow.
Can we do it at her house?
it ain't big enough, man. It's about as big as this right up here.
All right, so. that's one.
Crossroads Baptist Church is another one that you could reach out to.
Also, so along with that, so the Heritage Fair is coming up, that's kind of a listing post, that's the planned festival. So the Apple Festival, if we were prepared for, would be one. Are there other venues that are gonna happen over the next year that we can go settle a table at and say, comp plan, what's your thoughts on A, B, and C? You know, we're having a meeting here. Are there other options that y'all can think of?
Apple Festival's this weekend.
Right, I'm not.
Oktoberfest.
Yep.
Right, Oktoberfest
Oktoberfest
is one there. So once again, if you all think of some things coming up with more than, I didn't even think about the Apple Fest, so I could have been prepared for that, but I wasn't. So those are things that we could think about. So if you know something's coming up, oh, next month's a car show, next month's a something.
Well, they have car shows downtown Seneca once a month, maybe?
At Family
Like on Ramcat
Family
Alley or
Restaurant.
somewhere right
They have
down
one
there?
at Family Restaurant. Biggin has one there. The
Yeah.
first
Think about it.
Saturday of every month.
All right, and please just keep me, if you all know things like that. Also, if the comp plan people are available to come here and start, the process with us. The question is, do we want them to come, well, we have regular scheduled meetings, so if they're available October 1st to come, 1st and 2nd, stay here for 2 days on the ground and run around with us, run around with me, run around with y'all, as well as come to the planning commission meeting. Or we can do it later on in the month and they can be here for a little longer. So that really comes to y'all. So October 1 is our first meeting in October, that we're already scheduled for. So if you'd like for them to come then, or later on in the month, they can stay for a little longer.
I'd say later in the month, I'd say a little longer.
I will not be here October 1st, that's all I know.
Right.
Get my
The
marine.
end of October just doesn't have any scheduled meetings, so it'd be an additional chunk of your life you'd be spending with me, so.
You got 2 weeks there that, or like a week and a half, there's nothing in October. I think I'm like Gwen, I think later in the month where they can maybe spend a little more time.
When is the October Fest?
The 20th.
Oh, I was gonna say, usually it's the third, so it's like the 16th to the 19th.
I'm thinking it's the 26th, 27th, somewhere
What's the
that last
third
weekend.
weekend in
I
October?
don't think it's the last one.
Mm-mm, it's
The
usually-
19th,
Yeah, if I had to guess, I'd say that's what it
19th,
is.
20th.
You got-
Whatever weekend it's gonna rain, so.
Right, or at least the weekend right after
I'll
it
turn
rained
my
real
phone
bad.
off, otherwise it'll be raining.
Adam, did you say they were coming 1st of October regardless?
No, not regardless. They would be available for that, if that's.
I mean, would it be better to have them come and kind of get their feet on the ground with you and then come back to us at the end of the month after they've absorbed? And I don't know what's in their contract as far as trips and mileage and all
Right,
that
so
stuff.
they could come and do that, but the more trips they have to make back and forth, like, because they're gonna stay here, they're not gonna go back to Greenville, wherever else, they're gonna stay here in Oconee County, that way they can be here for maximum time, so we're paying for more hotels, more things of that nature. So the maximum amount of time with each time they're here is probably for the best. Yeah. But I just said October 1st because we already have a scheduled meeting, and that may work for y'all's schedule. But they definitely want to meet with you, because there's no, definitely, this is your baby.
So they're gonna want more time from us than a meeting, scheduled meeting time?
They'll probably want more than an hour, but they may want, if they're gonna say drive around your area, maybe they'd be great saying, hey, Ms. Lyles, we hop in the car with us and just show us a couple things, kind of thing. Or, if there's something of importance in your area that you're like, hey, you all really have to check this out. I'm sure they would love much more hands-on tour versus go drive down 183.
Based on that, and based on the various districts, would it be worth you setting up our meeting with each person up here or something that they could talk about, hey, these are things that are going on that we see going on in our area that we want you to start becoming aware of?
Right, and I think that's probably part and parcel of them coming to meet with the planning commission as a whole. Because that'd be a full day with them just sitting down for an hour with each of you individually, which certainly we can. We also email them back and forth.
Well, if you're talking about them having several days here.
Yeah, so 2 to 3 days. So I think towards the end of October, they can come for 3 days. 1st of October, which coincides with y'all's meeting, they can come for 2 days.
How does it work out to our second meeting?
So I can imagine how the first meeting goes. I then imagine how the second meeting will work, how it kind of plays out.
No, I mean with our second meeting in October.
Oh, it doesn't.
It doesn't work with that either.
The Oktoberfest is October 19th through the 21st.
Is what, ma'am?
Is October 19th through the 21st.
Okay, yeah, so they're
That's a
talking towards
Thursday,
that
Friday,
the
Saturday.
very last week of October, I think 26, 27, 28, 27, 28, 29.
I mean,
That's fine with me.
if they're coming here to get their feet wet, to me, it kind of makes sense to go ahead and bring them on 1st of October and let them get their feet wet. And, 2 days versus 3 days, I don't know what they can't do in 2 days they could do in 3. I mean.
I think your intention probably to meet with some of any focus groups I come up with or other individuals and peoples and times. I think that's probably their intent. I mean, I think more time is on the ground probably better, I guess, the more time they spend with us. And then their intent is because November, December, they have issues getting people together, just in general, all governments do things of that nature. So it'd probably be a lull, at least for them coming back, because they're going to basically do the population element. They don't really need input on the population element. They're going to grab the census data and say, there's X people here, there's X people there. Now, what the goals and the strategy for that, of course, will be in our wheelhouse, but the actual background material for that will be something they're working on in the background. But I don't know when the second meeting will be. I guess that's how the first one goes.
So when are they planning to meet with the public?
That'll be part of whenever they come, they'll start that public meeting process. So when they come here, on the 1st of October or the end of October, we'll arrange some public meetings with them as well. That you all can attend, that you all are more than welcome to attend and invite to attend, but we don't need a planning commission forum to make it happen.
So, in other words, okay, if we have a meeting on the 1st, they can come to that meeting, chit-chat, whatever. And then they can't come back, right? So we have to
So if they
pick.
come on the 1st, they'll start at 8 in the morning. Let's say it's Monday morning. I'll hopefully arrange some other meetings with,
It is a Monday and a Tuesday.
like a realtors group, or an agricultural group, or a builders group that day. And then they'll just keep working, meeting with individual smaller groups, and maybe we'll get some time to set up a larger kind of district-wide group after that point. But for the first meeting they have, probably kind of keep the meetings we have, just to kind of get everyone's with it.
So regardless of whether they come 1st of October or late October, they're not going to come back till after the 1st of January.
That's maybe. Perhaps, maybe they say, okay, well, there's something going on in November we have to come back for, which is quite a possibility. Or maybe we find something that's happening in December, they'll come back for it. They said in their experience, getting public to show up to anything in November or December tends to be just not an efficient use of their time.
How many of us would you need available on the 1st and 2nd?
I would like you all here on the 1st if possible. I know you're not available, but their goal here, when they're for the first meeting, is to come meet with you all. That's a primary element of them showing up here, is to meet with you all. And kind of get your feeling. Like, for instance, page count's a big thing with us, it being an encyclopedia when it should be a Reader's Digest kind of thing.
They would do that at our meeting at 6 o'clock though, right?
Yeah, they could, right, that's why you already have a.
So that way nobody would have to be here during the day. We could just wait till our meeting and then.
That's correct, but if we have, say, a focus group meeting, let's say we have a meeting with a bunch of realtors here during the day, I'll say, hey, we're having this meeting, do you all want to come? If not, that's okay, we can still have it without you.
Right, and then we can have our discussions and stuff at our meeting at 6 o'clock that night.
Do we do that, or are we gonna have to still have our formal?
We would have a formal meeting, but it would be basically around this particular subject. We wouldn't have a whole lot of business on that.
The only thing to
It would
me-
just be the comp plan and that's it for that meeting.
Unless it's an emergency thing that has
Unless-
to be
yeah.
taken care of.
Unless the council
Just
said you
put it
gotta
off
get this done
unless
right now.
It has to be taken care of.
So,
Have we started any public notification of the comprehensive plan process?
So it just became aware of a budget available for it, for some radio advertisements. And I wanted to find out when we're gonna have the first meeting before I started putting anything out there on the radio.
Aside from the meetings about it, I've got a feeling that if we had the public informed, we might have a few more people here at our regular meetings.
Okay.
And start hearing what our friends and neighbors have to say.
I can certainly start doing that. I can kind of work on some ad copy I have. We do have the budget, and I'm in touch with the WGOG 97.1 people. So, yeah, we're definitely, we're able to do that. So, once we decide tonight when we're gonna have the first meeting, then I'll start, we can run that, even if we don't have a meeting coming up, say, hey, we're having a comprehensive plan, come to the planning commission every, first and third Monday. I like that idea. It's a good idea.
There's a meeting next Monday night at the gazebo down on Highway 11, the gazebo restaurant, for the Southern Oconee something. I don't know exactly what it's called, but that might be a good place for us to get some information from. I'm planning to attend if something doesn't happen. So I don't know if there's information that you may want to let that group know, that we're going through this process, and maybe they can give us some info that comes out of the meeting.
Yeah, if you're going, definitely. If you think you're going, let me know, and then we can try to arrange something, certainly.
Speaking of that, when you start working on public service announcements, if you would send those things out to Rotary or Lions Club or any other organization out there, just to let them know that, hey, this is happening. So.
and all the chambers.
Well,
There's only one time.
back to the calendar. I'm looking at the calendar. October 1st is 3 weeks from Monday. Adam can't pull this together in 3 weeks.
Right.
I was saying October 1st is 3 weeks from Monday.
Right.
So you can't pull this together in 3 weeks and make it worth.
Radio advertisements, things of
Yeah,
that nature.
I mean,
Probably.
organize all these meetings and so.
Right, it would be a stretch, but they are available for it, so.
So I would say late October.
And I would like to see us try to make Oktoberfest as far as a booth if possible.
I'll look into Oktoberfest. Does anybody know who's running that other than, does anybody know?
The Sertoma Club,
Saratoga Club?
I don't know.
You get people from the entire county at that. I mean, you'll get a lot of diverse opinions. You just want to get them before they go to the tent.
Yes, get them before they get there.
You may get some
Get 'em early in the
strange
evening.
requests after they come out of the
Well,
tent.
actually, ma'am, in order to be really in the spirit with it, I'll probably have to be in.
The
I
tent.
get a key card for that, right?
Have a table set up right in the middle.
Are you guys gonna be at the fair?
Who wrote? No, the ag board, so,
Absolutely, yeah. No, I'm thinking of the planning commission as far as the comprehensive plan.
so the agriculture advisory board has a table at the upcoming Heritage Fair. To that end, we're gonna advertise, you know, the ag board, things of that nature. I can definitely do things for the comprehensive plan as well. I can organize some advertisements, things of that nature. Maybe a survey perhaps, but more lines of, what Mr. Bradley was stating as far as advertising it.
When is the Heritage Fair, Gwen?
25th through the 29th. You know, I'm just, as a teacher, when we used to go to conferences, I know you have a lot of those little nickels. Put a bowl out on your table. People will come to your booth if there's something there they can pick up by the hand.
We have like 10 pounds of those left, and they're tired of me throwing them around this building.
And I will buy you enough peppermints to put you matching bowls.
All right.
That'll get double the crowd.
Look at that. It's tax
There you
write-off.
go.
All right, cool. Well, those are things
So if
to
you've
work
got
on.
a survey and then we'll just put a box at the exit gate, would that work?
Would that plan work for Oktoberfest as well? Do the same thing that you do at the Heritage Fair at Oktoberfest? Would that work?
If I can make the Oktoberfest thing work, certainly. I can do that as long as I can find the time and things of that nature. Yeah, let me see what the particulars of it are, and I'll get back to you.
Gwen, it's 25th of September?
Yes. Nothing like putting a rush on the staff here.
Okay.
Oh, and the corridor plan, I have a meeting in Greenville on September 12th about, so news at 11 after that.
All right, let's move right along to our next discussion. Item number 8, discussion on clarification of certain code sections bearing on land use and development in specific regards to recreational vehicle parks. We have one gentleman signed up that would like to speak, Mr. Tom Markovich.
Thank you. For the record, I am Tom Markovich. I will continue to raise my objection to the idea of creating this new regulatory hurdle. I really don't see what this has to do with. I mean, we are not talking about subdividing and creating lots. We're talking about RVs that are coming in on a temporary basis. And then we don't even, within the document itself, define what temporary is. We don't say if it's less than 30 days or what it amounts to. I mean, what comprises, what ends up being temporary. We just say we're going to leave it up to staff to figure out what temporary is. Well, I think that's kind of a dangerous precedent. They may decide it's one thing at one time, and they may decide it's something different at another time. So, one, I don't understand unless somebody is actually subdividing a piece of property and creating a subdivision, why we are dealing with this. This is really more about commerce than it is about planning. And then that also brings up the other subject is we talked about the idea that there's somebody down near the university who has chicken houses right now, and they're talking about getting rid of them, want to put in spaces to bring in RVs. There's 7 ball games a year. That's, I mean, again, how are we going to define temporary? That's, you know, I mean, what's going to come? They're going to be there for what, 2 or 3 days at the most. I mean, it's not something like somebody's coming in and parking a vehicle like a, you know, similar to a mobile home for 30 days or more, in which they end up in a leasehold situation. We're talking about people that are coming in on a temporary basis, and I don't really see what that's got to do with anything the planning commission's doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Markovich. All right. Mr. Adam?
Sir. So, all the language that you all have asked for over the course of the meetings that we've gone through has been adjusted, added, otherwise edited to your liking. Interesting about the chicken houses that Mr. Markovich had mentioned. There's only one chicken house in that general area, and people do watch these meetings on the YouTube. And the person who owns that land actually showed up in my office, and he's like, "Who's trying to do that? I'm not trying to do it." So somebody's, you know, doing, you know, kind of speculating, trying to do their due diligence on the property. and has approached different people, but everyone but him regarding it. So he was kind of shocked because he was like, wow, I didn't know I was doing that on my property. He's like, but can I?
Property's for sale.
It is for sale. He kind of liked the idea.
Yeah, he made it back out of the sale.
But it's true, and he's like, I've been around chicken houses for the last 20 years. Why would I want to park an RV next to one? So, anyways, that's neither here nor there. I just thought it was interesting caveat that people do watch these on the YouTube.
Good.
Was this brought about because of the situation that we have in Crossroads area?
It was pushed to the forefront because of that. This had been on our table because enough people had asked about it, enough neighbors had asked about it, and not just in that area. It was definitely pushed to the top of the pile because of that issue. Yes, ma'am.
Does it solve that issue?
It definitely helps that issue as far as location. So for instance, it says no part of any of the lots of the parking areas can be in a setback. It would force the movement of some things that wouldn't necessarily be done it would take some effort.
And that particular part wouldn't be grandfathered so that this doesn't apply to it?
As things move around. No, ma'am. It wouldn't, at least in my estimation of it, wouldn't. But that's, I think you said it's no good just to make an ordinance for one piece of one property, just to use a hammer for something a scalpel would do.
Right.
And we do have a code enforcement officer now, and they are addressing that situation. However, this issue existed before that came to the forefront. So the idea of, people live in RVs because it's inexpensive, generally speaking. We have very little to no affordable housing in the county. And some of the RV parks we do have are just incredible. They're beautiful. People show up, people drive from all over the country to come stay in them, and that's not who this is addressed towards. It's addressed towards the people who are, well, look, my grandpa's in the hospital. I got an acre back here. Let's see how many people I can shove back here. That's where this is kind of addressed towards.
There's one on 59. If you used to have a mobile home on it, they took it apart. It now has an RV on it. Occasionally, that'll have another RV and another RV and a whole row of tents. And then on Monday, they'll be gone. Closer to town, on the left, going into town. And then all of a sudden, it'll be gone. It'll be down to one. And then all of a sudden, there'll be two. And then there'll be a whole bunch of tents. And I see that one becoming, I don't know the other one, I have no idea. But I see that one as becoming the kind of thing that if I was in that neighborhood, I would certainly be concerned.
And I think we have to kind of look through the lens of some of the other issues that we have in this county, as far as homelessness, drug problems.
Yes,
It creates situations that this could maybe help prevent.
I believe this is a tool in the hand of that enforcement officer.
And also, there's no additional cost outside of the owner's time to apply for these. So it's not like there's like $1,000 a house or anything like that. It's just part and parcel whenever they come in for like their NEC hookup, their electric hookups. They'll be like, oh, go talk to Adam across the hallway, and let's write out a site plan. So.
If it is something that we're going to be in favor of pushing forward to council, I'd like the wording the way we've finally got it drafted.
I've got a concern.
Yes, sir.
About our operating requirements. Are we, is Oconee County wanting to take on enforcement of DHEC rules and regulations?
No, sir. Elsewhere in the code, we also reference DHEC standards, must have septic tanks, things of that nature. This is just restating what has to happen. So it just says you'll have to apply to DHEC. It's not us saying we're going to take in responsibility for it, but it is us saying that we're aware that DHEC does have standards, and therefore you're going to have to follow those standards. But no, I have no enforcement capabilities for septic tanks or water.
Well, do we want something in the code that we're not going to enforce?
We can, of course, strike the language. It doesn't take away the fact that DHEC will enforce the rules and regulations. It's just restating the fact, but we can It won't affect the septic regulations if we take it out or we leave it in.
But we can, with this language in there, we can like alert DHEC if we see a problem, like if our code enforcement goes out there and they see that there's a huge sanitation problem, then we can alert DHEC.
Certainly,
That there's a problem.
yes. And with them being in our office, it's really quite handy for that.
Well, in this day and time, sometimes you have to spell things out for people, because that way they read it and they go, oh, well, you don't have any enforcement, but now they'll know DHEC does.
I mean, what other state laws do we need to state in our county regulations?
Pretty much all of them.
Do you need a motion to move this forward to council?
That's up to you.
I mean, murder's against the law, but it's not against the county law.
I don't know. I kind of, we've taken 6 stabs at this, and it seems like, I understand it, seems like a good intention, but again, somewhat to Tom's point, parking, the use of any public road, sidewalk, or right-of-way for the purpose of parking vehicles is prohibited. So you're telling people they can't park on a public road. Why?
That just echoes the roads and bridges. We don't have roadside parking or on-street parking.
Yeah, and there's, I guess our end of the county must have more trouble than some
Oh,
others.
yeah, I'm sure we do.
But there's a place not far from between Ms. Lyle and I that has the potential. And if they're having a big weekend, they might be parked on a public road that's barely 2 lanes wide.
Right.
And it becomes an issue if I've got to go somewhere. I have to be careful that there's nothing else trying to get around them on the other side from the other direction. And you would think, but they don't have room. I mean, they can park their 2 cars, well, 1 car. The other one is hanging out if it's there. So, I understand about we have friends who are farmers who also have recreational vehicles because there's somebody here on a pipeline inspection or there's somebody here. But those are definitely temporary. They're here for however many weeks they're here, and then they've got their home time from Oklahoma. They go home to Oklahoma for 6 or 7 weeks, and then they come back here for 6 or 7 weeks. That's truly temporary. I understand about the plants needing workers and bringing them in. But on the other hand, I also know that in a perfect world, people wouldn't set these things up and then let them become a nuisance within the community. But it's not a perfect world. And I really think in this county, as it grows, we need something that gives them the tools that they need to prevent a public nuisance.
You know me, I am for property owners' rights 100%. But the only thing that pushes me towards this is I know that there is such a drug problem in this county that these people are going to live wherever that they can live, and they're going to not have public facilities there. And I don't want to see anybody have to live beside feces all mounding up because these people are so messed up that they don't even care that they're living in it. And their neighbors are having to deal with that, and there's nothing they can do about it. And this does help that, because at least if there's more than 4 places there, then somebody's going to be out there and see it. Somebody's got to make sure that there's public, a septic tank or something on that property to dispose of that waste. Because right now, they don't have to dispose of that waste. They can pile it up if they want. They can go in a bucket and pour it out. And then the neighbors have to deal with that.
Go ahead.
To further Ms. Lyle's point, and I am also a huge proponent of individuals' property rights, I also, and I'm hearing Mr. Markovich saying that this is a commerce issue, and I understand that. However, last week we had a conversation about billboards, and billboards is commerce. I do think that, that if this is something that staff sees as a future element, and obviously we have people here that see this as a future element, that does become a planning commission responsibility. And if staff needs tools to help into the future, not necessarily, we have a responsibility to protect the individual of their property rights, but we also have a responsibility to protect all of the individuals in the county to be able to enjoy where they live as well. And I think that this might help us prevent some problem in the future that maybe doesn't currently exist, but maybe showing its face. So if staff sees this as a tool, I'm for it.
And that said, I will make a motion that we move it forward to council.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion?
Do we define temporary? Asking a question.
That's part of moving forward, I would say.
So once again, this only applies to, what do we say, the application? It wasn't for industry. It wasn't for people coming here for, to work in a plant or a factory. It was strictly for recreation or vacation. So as far as temporary goes, and there was talk about the festivals, the fairs, and the other functions we have that draw in commerce. So temporary doesn't have a definition there, however, it's temporary.
Perhaps county could request
Not
that
permanent.
we come up with that definition or define it themselves? Can they define it themselves? Or does that have to be done as a definition in this ordinance to move it forward?
To move it forward, it'd be good. I mean, I think it's kind of an elusive thing to define. I don't have an objection to it being as written, as long as it's applied uniformly by the community development director, which I'm sure would be the case. So everybody is treated fairly and equally in determining what is temporary and what is not. But I really think, just practically, I don't know how you put a definition on temporary under this circumstance. If you're obviously just looking for days, I mean.
If they're requesting a power permit, would that determine whether it's a temporary park or not? Because
That's
most of them
perfect.
aren't gonna go through the trouble of putting power in if it's just gonna be there a couple of weeks.
So it's interesting, so back to our chicken house one, they actually inquired about pulling power for that time frame because, Clemson is a draw and people would be willing to pay. So the issue with pulling power is that in order to get power, you need to have a septic tank. So they're kind of hand in hand. So I can imagine if you're gonna pull power, as required by the code, then yes, that could be utilized as a factor, as a way to kind of determine if it's permanent or not.
Well, except that if there's a chicken house there, there's already power there. Therefore, he can run power from wherever. At that point, there's no more codes involved, technically. If he wants to set up something that is disadvantageous to, if it's advantageous to industry and, you don't have to have all those other things. In other words, that is something, because there is already power at that poultry house. He could, I'm not saying he should, but he could.
So drop cords would go, to run it off an extension cord or a drop cord would go against the code to run them off. Each of them needs the breaker and things of that nature. I'm not the building codes person, I just know this from our other conversation about that other property, is that they need to have a little podium, a little 4x4 with an outlet on it and things of that nature. They're not supposed to run it off of drop cord.
Well, and I'm just, okay, Clemson University, for example, at Garrison Arena, adjacent to their barns, there are a number of exactly what you're talking about. It's just a plug-in
Right.
for a motorhome that comes in affiliated with a horse show. There's nothing in this county that says that a man with a chicken house who already has power could not install multiple of those if he knew how. without asking the codes
Oh,
people.
certainly. That's 100%. There's a whole lot that's done here that I've seen that's really interesting, that people have done without codes.
And I'm,
But in lieu of a septic tank, they can also dig a privy.
That's also a
Also
fun
so
thing we
true.
learned too,
Well,
yes.
they don't have to do a septic tank, they just dig a
you
big
can have
hole
an
in the
official
ground
privy in
and
it.
put a
Yeah,
box
that's
over
right.
it, per se.
But if they're gonna do those things, then they're not coming to you anyway.
Right, exactly. And they're not running a business per se. They're gonna run it like one of the meth dens that you're
And-
talking about, so.
Well, yeah, not necessarily. But on the other hand, the people who don't do those things, you need this weapon. And really and truly, those folks are not temporary. That's the whole point. That's why you need this in your hands, because they started out temporary and then they became permanent. And somewhere in here, we need to make sure that this allows you to say you're not temporary anymore and you're not meeting this code, and therefore, I know that doesn't make sense. I just said that in a whole circle, but
But-
you know what I'm saying?
But the appeals, the
Defining
appeals.
temporary thing.
Right.
Yeah, that's what and I'm not trying to be, it just seems like we keep going around, but the problem is it's set up as temporary, then they become permanent, and then that's where the drugs and everything starts. I mean, we make some place where it's, people can go, and then once we start making them hook up permanent, per electric codes, then those things become more permanent, then they're there longer, and then that's where, then we have I don't know the place where, this thing originated from, but it just seems, if we're gonna send some up to council, I just don't wanna come, we send some things up, they come back, and I just don't know if we're digging a bigger hole here,
Mr.
then
Chapman,
we're
would it be possible for you to go,
just,
and
That'd be all right.
maybe Mr. Markovich needs to answer this question first. Are there enough temporary, short-term laborers in the county who live in a facility such as this for industry that Mr. Chapman could go to the industry and say, what is your standard temporary workers' time span? I mean, I know some of the pipeline people, their time is 6 weeks. 6 weeks here, 7 weeks home. 6 weeks here, 7 weeks home.
Mr. Markovich?
I can't address that question specifically because, but I do know that there are a lot of temporary, the Duke Power outage is a perfect example.
Yeah.
Sometimes the guys are coming in for a couple of months, but that doesn't mean they're staying here that entire time. But I can tell you what the code says. The code says that it's temporary if it's less than 30 days, okay? So if it's more than, now, the other thing that we kind of keep walking around what's going on here. I mean, I'm hearing the discussion about these properties that end up being nuisances. They're not temporary, okay? Those people have got those things in there. They're there for longer than 30 days, okay? They're staying more than just, So to me, the idea of having to define what that temporary is, and it's not that people won't find a way around it. I don't care what you come up with. There's always going to be a hole that you can drive a tractor trailer through. So all I'm saying, but I think that coming up with a definition for temporary, one, it's going to make staff's job that much easier. But what I keep hearing here, it's not about the issues with vacations and people who are here working temporary, is when people are trying to take advantage of a situation and saying that they're living in an RV, well, in fact, they actually are not temporary. They're here permanently. And I think that can be addressed by coming up with some sort of a day limit, a time limit, and that's going to define what.
Yeah, I mean, for me, temporary is 6 weeks, or whatever. And so if you worked with local industry and asked them what their standard temporary worker stay is, even if it's every other month for 2 years, such as an outage might be, then I'm sure there's a legal way to phrase that in such a way that those workers are not, those industries are not being penalized.
The only thing with
Like the
that
pipeline is in 6 weeks, home 7 weeks, in 6 weeks, home 7 weeks.
is that if there's a way around that. You leave it there for 30 days, you move it for a day, you come back for 30 days. you move it for a day. Because, I mean, there's people that do that that live in their RVs, they do that on campgrounds. I mean,
Oh,
they
yeah.
only allow
They
you
just
2
move
weeks.
from, yeah, they move
They
from,
move,
yeah.
you know, so,
And now we're talking about individuals versus the land's use.
Yeah, and I don't want to, I mean, like you say, there's always going to be a hole you can drive a tractor trailer through, so but if you came up with something that at least gave you a standard of which you could say, you know, the neighbors have been calling us now for, you've been here 2 months, and you know, where are you working? I don't know, at least it gives you a question, because you have a time frame that they have gone beyond, that we have designated is not a standard in this county. And does that work, Ms. Root, maybe?
Here is my, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry, let you answer that.
Well, my understanding is that you all excluded the transient workers. This is applicable just to recreation and vacation sites. So it goes to the owner of the site who is setting up. He's got a property and he's going to set up a park, and that park is going to be for temporary visitors in recreational vehicles. And so if he is going to do that, then he needs to go through these few hoops to do that. If he's going to set up his land for permanent multifamily housing, then this is not going to apply. If it's going to be set up and used for Duke Power folks, it's not going to apply, as I read it. And that's why I have a difficulty with the notion of, aside from ways around a day threshold like moving properties, this really goes to the intent of the developer, quote, more than the occupant. And it's going to be one of those situations where you're going to know it when you see it, more than a day limit, in my opinion. I don't claim to have all the knowledge, but that's just the way.
That's exactly what I was gonna say, is that somebody is going to turn to these pages in our ordinance book for one of 2 reasons. Either somebody comes into the office and says, hey, I'm thinking about building an RV park. What do I have to do? And Adam's gonna turn to these pages. Or you're gonna have a neighbor call and say, I've got a big problem here going on, at which time staff is gonna come out and see what the intended use is. And I don't think a number of days has anything to do with that. Is this hunters back in the back and the neighbors complaining because they're firing guns on their own land for a few days while they're camping? Or is somebody trying to set up a park? And I think that goes back to the intended use, and I think that this accomplishes that without putting a day in there.
Okay, we have a motion and a second on the table to send it forward. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?
Nay.
Okay. Let's move on to item number 9. Mr. Markovich, you're down to speak for this too.
Thank you. For the record again, Mr. Markovich. Anyway, as y'all know, this came back to you from the council. There was objections to, I don't know about objections, there was questions as to some of the language, and it really seemed to have as much of anything to do with the disclaimer requirement being stamped on the plans. And the more I looked into it, the more I researched it, I kind of understand why there would be some reluctance for somebody to have to stamp a set of plans, particularly a surveyor or an engineer, okay? It's not up to a surveyor or an engineer to determine the land use. In other words, if you can do something with it. Their primary, you can go into state code, it's all lined out, and they are actually governed by a state agency, not by a county agency. And it tells exactly what they can and cannot do. And nowhere in it does it say they can determine land uses and whether or not somebody can build on a piece of property. So I can understand why somebody would be reluctant to, empower themselves or even through the county and begin to start stamping plans. I think there would be an inherent liability there. I know if somebody came up with certain types of requirements for me as a builder that were outside of the state requirements, I would have huge issues. Nonetheless, there is still the dilemma of the idea that somebody wants to take a piece of property and transfer it to an adjacent piece of property. I think the code already accounts for this, because even though, yes, you've technically created a subdivision when you take that piece of property off, there is an exception to the statute and says if you haven't actually created a new lot, in other words, you've got the same number of lots that you had before you started, then you haven't done anything that's actually created the new subdivision. You've just merely moved a line. And so now, there is still a dilemma, because regardless of that, anytime you replat a piece of property, the Register of Deeds is going to have to record it. And the law says the Register of Deeds cannot record that piece of property unless it's been approved by the planning staff. And so I think, though, it's a matter of recognizing that there is a process that has to go through, but it doesn't actually require somebody to stamp that set of plans and say, no, you can't build on this and you can't, I think that's probably maybe a little bit, and maybe almost in conflict. There's another section of the state code that has to do with subdivisions, and it has to do with the determination of restricted deeds. And you begin to get into a whole kind of a conflict there, and those, you probably don't know it, but I was asked many years ago to get that state law changed by this county, because it was going to require, every time somebody wanted to pull a building permit, they were going to have to get a title search done, the way the language was written before. And so I think you have to be very, very careful when you begin to start putting language in here with requirements like, telling somebody, well, you're not going to be able to build on this, and then somebody's going to come back and pull a permit, and they got to determine whether or not that's a restrictive covenant, and it gets, I don't know. I understand where the county's trying to go with this. At the same time, there's one other aspect, and I was about to get past it. There's another thing in here that it says basically that you can move that line, and it doesn't create a new lot. But as long as it fits within the requirements, the guidance that's already existing. In other words, like, let's just say you were in Lake Residential and there's a minimum lot size. If you were trying to cut off a piece of property that made it less than the minimum lot size, I think you would be barred from doing that. But it also talks about the combination and recombination of lots. Now, this is what my problem is. You've got lots that were put into Lake Residential zoning that don't meet the requirement now. So what are you going to do in Port Bass? There's Lake Residential in Port Bass on lots that are less than 2/10 of an acre. What are you going to do when all of a sudden somebody wants to combine two lots and then they still don't meet the, this is a very tricky thing. I think there's maybe some, I don't know where the county's trying to go with this. I realize there was a lawsuit, but I don't know that this fixes the problem per se. Anyway.
Thank you, Tom.
If I could, just to set up the procedural posture of it, you all sent this amendment to 32-214 via an ordinance to council. They had first reading on it and second reading. During second reading, they made a motion to amend the ordinance to strike the language in Amendment 2 on y'all's sheet. That motion passed with the addition that it would be sent back to you all to report on your thoughts about that. So what is noted on, I believe, the same document you have is Amendment 1. That was your amendment. That was not, council approved that. So the ordinance still has that, getting rid of the .57. That's not an issue for you all. What's in front of you now is, do you want to reply back and say, we like this language, we would prefer that you put it back in, and if so, why? Or, okay, it's good, it's fine with the way you took it out.
They took out all of 2, or they just took out the part that's in italics?
No, they took out all of 2. Creation of lots, down. Everything that was
They
gonna
do
be put in as a, red stamp disclaimer onto the plat.
And who were we relying on to put this disclaimer on? Would the surveyor have to put this disclaimer on, or is the Register of Deeds?
No, not the county, not the Register of Deeds is not putting it on. I mean, the surveyor hasn't, Adam has dealt with this.
So this language came directly from another surveyor who gave me a lot that was 4 square feet, something of that nature. So a lot of these tiny little micro lots come up as Duke has a voodoo trigonometry as far as to how you get docked. And sometimes you just need an extra 6 inches, or you have 6 inches too much of property. So one neighbor will say, hey, can you sell me 6 inches of property? And so that's what they do, and they create these little postage stamp size parcels that in order to transfer, they have to have surveyed, and they need an instrument to transfer that. They can't just say, have it. So that's the purpose of this. So earlier this week, I got someone built over their property line, built a driveway over the property line. So they bought a sliver of land, 12 feet long by 2 feet wide from their neighbor, just so that all that 12 by 2 is on their own property now. There's nothing really they can do on that. There's setbacks, things of that nature, and it's all control-free district. So the minimum lot size, to speak to Mr. Markovich's point, yeah, under a 1/4 acre, which is the minimum lot size of residential, this is not what this is for. This is merely to put a buyer beware stamp on a piece of property that says, hey, somebody said you can build on this, but you can't.
But on those circumstances like that, would they not just add that onto their property that they already have? Would they not just have their whole property resurveyed to include that?
You would think, and certainly there's those little postage stamp size ones. Yes, you would think so, but not always, because what if they're just trying to get rid of a piece, or they want to deed it over to someone else? They have just little bits hanging out there. That maybe someone gets a wild hair, says, "Oh, look, I've got this tiny little thing you can build on." It's strictly a buyer beware stamp.
And it definitely happens. So, now, is it important, is it not important? That I don't know. I can tell you that if I was a surveyor, I would not want to take the liability of that entire statement. And if I was a surveyor, I might be willing to stop that language under Amendment 2 put a period after development permit, period, and remove until it has been. And that way, you're simply giving warning without consequence, saying, hey, this may be an issue. Where personally I see it as potential issues, I gave you all an example, this is real life subdivision. You take that subdivision, highlighted in yellow is the only place that's buildable. And as you'll see there, that would make a house that's about 25 feet wide by 40 or 50 feet, 60 feet, 70 feet long, however long you wanted to make it, but only about 20 feet wide. Now, is it buildable? Yes, it's buildable. Would a surveyor have to mark it? No. Unfortunately, somebody bought this lot and tries to sell it, and now there is would a buyer beware possibility there have helped? Maybe. Was it our responsibility to say, hey, this is an issue? I don't know. But this stuff also happens frequently where you have very challenged situations that a surveyor will sit there and say, this is right on the edge. A surveyor does talk about setbacks on their survey. A surveyor does talk about some other issues at times. I don't know that we should put all of this off on a surveyor. At the moment, it's not on anybody other than the buyer. And this is a buyer beware state in that buyers do have obligations to do things for themselves. So I'm not saying that we should go back to county council with this. I can say that as it's written, I think it probably has problems that a surveyor wouldn't want to touch with a 10-foot pole. I also think that this amendment puts a lot on the surveyor. Maybe we should ask that a surveyor simply rubber stamp every survey that talks about, hey, there's issues that you should be aware of. I think slivers of land, I think that people should easily be aware, hey, you're not putting a house on that. But it's when it starts growing in size to where everybody says, man, this is a good-looking piece of property. I could put a house right there and everything would be great. And all of a sudden find due to setbacks and things like that they actually can't.
But you said setbacks are on the plats?
On some surveys now, setbacks do show up, yes.
But they're not required to show up.
That's a question I'm not sure of.
Probably not. I mean, they're probably just required to show, and this is just a guess, but a lot of the surveyors that provide, I see a lot of surveys, they will put a buildable area line. There's a dash line inside of the property line says, this is where you can build. That happens a lot, although it's definitely not required. I'm almost positive it's not required.
And what makes this lot not buildable? Setbacks?
The setbacks, and it's not that it's not buildable, it's just that you have an HOA that requires a certain size home, and that size home won't fit on that lot.
And
Unless,
is that not the responsibility of the HOA to?
you would think it was the
Notify them?
responsibility to the developer, but we don't necessarily have things in place that fall back on that developer. Because people are buying dirt, and that's what the developer's selling. Hey, I'm selling a piece of dirt, here it is. I'm not telling you what you can or can't do, other than you gotta follow these rules if you do anything with it. Not everybody,
Like, if it's in an HOA, then they give them a copy of the rules
Correct.
with the HOA.
They do give them a copy of the rules.
And it's the responsibility of the buyer to make sure that that property
does that.
meets those rules.
Again, a developer is selling, I'm selling this piece of land. If you wanna put a house on it, I didn't sell you a house, I sold you the piece of dirt. You can set your lawn chairs out there and enjoy that piece of dirt. I think the consuming public doesn't realize that they're going down that level of liability, if that makes sense. And
But I
again, I'm
think we
not
should
fighting
put-
for this ordinance or not, I'm just know that it's a true issue out there.
But that HOA should take some responsibility for making sure that any property that comes under them meets their
But an HOA and a developer are two-way different things. The developer sells it, 2 or 3 or 4 years later, an HOA finally develops. Now they're just a bunch of homeowners. It's a homeowners association. So they didn't sell that to that buyer. Matter of fact, they came about and were organized 3, 4, 5, 10 years later.
Tom, please make it quick.
You were talking about what setbacks and whatnot a surveyor will end up. All the deeded right-of-ways, and if there's covenants that are written in for like a utility right-of-way down the side of a lot, all of that will be deeded on there. Now, that's not to say that in many cases, I may ask my surveyor to come in and put the setbacks in there because I have to bring a plat up to the county that's gonna show, where that house is gonna sit and it's gonna fit within. So I may ask him in some cases, but generally, they're not gonna put the building setbacks because those are not, but they're gonna put the ones that are recorded, the recorded right-of-ways in the deeds. They are required to do that.
Thank you, Tom.
To me, there's no way we can put the onus back on the surveyor.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest, I didn't even realize when I read it, I love the wording because I know that it is, people do get suckered into stuff all the time because they see a beautiful piece of property and they don't realize sitting there, look, it's hard to eyeball 25 feet from here and 25 feet from there. And some people buy it without ever getting a chance to come here, they buy it off the map. I didn't realize that until it has been combined with another tract in a manner that creates a conforming, that puts the onus back on the surveyor. I absolutely do not agree needs to be there, but if we're required to tell people that coffee is hot, and that's $1 or less, it would seem to me that we should at least let people know that there is possibly an issue with a tract of land. If that's seen, is your office the one that would pick it up when it's sold?
As far as.
Or when it's changed, or what, so that it is made a bit, when you look, I think that ought to be out there somewhere, so that when a buyer is looking at something, they at least go, oh, well, maybe I need to check what the setbacks are. Because they may not have the experience to know. If they're an older couple just getting ready to retire, they've got this dream of living on the lake, and they see this beautiful tract, they've been approached by a realtor, and I mean, if it's an ideal world, all realtors would tell them all the story, but they don't. They want to sell the property. So, or all developers would tell all this, and all people that are retiring would know all the rules, but they don't. So, I think we need to let them know that we do owe it to people who are moving into our county, or who would like to move into our county, not to be taken advantage of. If you can do that by simply striking until it has been combined with another tract, so that they read that and go, probably ought to check into that before I spend $250,000 or whatever it is.
Well, you've got the opposite end of that spectrum too. Young people who are just buying their first piece of property, they have no clue that there is even setbacks.
Yeah.
They don't know what they're doing yet. They just are getting started, and they see this piece of property that's up for sale, and they may not even be using a realtor, so they don't have anybody that's going to inform them. They're buying it from an individual. They could really get taken.
Mr. Reed, what's wrong with the phrasing of changing it to the zoning, conforming with is under, whatever it's zoned is what it has to apply to, and leaving it at that. By the underlying zoning, just changing the minimum lot size to be determined by the underlying zoning district. And leaving it at that.
They didn't amend that. They
There's
didn't
nothing
delete
wrong
that.
with
That's
that.
still
All
there.
we're working on is amendment 2.
Then I say we,
So what they did delete was what's under amendment 2. That's what y'all are talking about. And so, like I said, you could just say, all right, well, the planning commission acknowledges that you amended to delete that and has no objection or no comment. Or we would like you to reconsider or reconsider it in this version. However you want to do it. But you should probably put some reasons to it. If you're going to do anything aside from saying we just accept your amendment.
At least from what I'm getting out of this is, this has nothing to do with subdivisions, putting in homes and all this. It has nothing to do with that. This has something to do with me having an acre of land and needing 11 inches by 200 foot to meet setback requirements, because I want my home right here. I don't want it over here, I want it right here on this piece of land. So my neighbor decides he's gonna sell me that 11 inches by 200 foot for me to build my house where I want it and stay with the setbacks. Now, I build my house, and I don't worry about this plat, because I've got it surveyed out and got that 11 inches cut off, and I die. I leave all of my stuff to my fictitious son, daughter's wife, or whatever. And she comes in and builds a porch on the side of the house. And she can't do that by code because she goes over the setbacks. But she thinks, hey, wait a minute, I've got exactly enough land here. This is for something of that nature, to let her know that she can't do that until she gets it all in her name, or gets everything, that whole piece of land in one plat. Because even with that little 11 inches, it's got setbacks. And you can't add, you can't do anything there. You can't add nothing to it. This would protect people like that. I don't know that the surveyor's the one that needs to be doing it. I still think it's I don't know what you would do, but that was the purpose, I think, of this whole thing, just like the one Adam, he showed that I looked at in his office, where a guy had bought a sliver here and gave his neighbor a sliver over here. But yet, now there's 4 plats for this lot, or these 2 lots. There's Lot A, Lot 1A, Lot B, Lot 1B. You got 4 plats for this thing, and you've got these two slivers, and I thought they were like 11.5 inches wide.
They were
So-
tiny.
But you can't do anything until it's added to the plat. Yes, sir. Please make it quick.
Yeah,
It's
please make it.
time to go.
Mr. Chairman, I take your point in terms of what you're talking about, but let's just say in that exact circumstance, that 11-inch circumstance, unless that person follows through and has that plat redone and recorded, they can't issue the permit because they don't know. It's still the same lot. So there's already a protection there, okay? So
Not everybody gets a permit to put on a porch of a house. Not everybody does things like that. People build stuff without the county even knowing about it until they fly over and take a picture.
Mr. Chapman, I guess it boils down to, if Amendment 2 is taken out, will it make your job more difficult in the future?
No, it won't make my job more difficult. This just came about as citizens have come to me and said, hey, I got this piece. And speaking to Ms. Lyles, we had a couple come up from Charleston, gym teacher, come up from Charleston and buy a piece at one of what Mr. Johnson told me is a pretty common thing where they basically hijack you, throw you out there, and really kind of up the sale tempo. It's quite interesting. You should tell it. But he bought a piece of land, and it's nominally, if this isn't the piece of land, I'd be surprised. And like, it's on a teacher's salary, so it's a great deal, but now he's got some dirt he can put some chairs on.
And I guess I didn't mean easier, I meant easier to swallow, perhaps. If someone has been taken advantage of, I know that you don't like it, I know that I would not like it. So if this is removed, is there a greater likelihood that people may suffer the consequences of not knowing all those things about setbacks and things when they're young or older, middle-aged?
Yeah, and that was the genesis of this, is that people have come and said, oh, I've got this piece of land up on some of the smaller lakes, some of the older, smaller lakes, and they're 300-foot long by, 20-foot wide, just the right size for them to build their dream house on.
Their mini house.
And no wonder none of the parcels have been built next to it, because none of it's buildable between the HOA setbacks and the floodplains and things of that nature.
Do you need a motion on how we send this back to them? I would like to make a motion that we, in fact, send it back to council with that if they wish to strike wording that would put a burden on surveyors, developers, whatever, for ensuring that something is done, as far as plat recording can be removed, but that a general warning to protect consumers.
Can we put the burden on the developer? Is there any way to do that? Because that's ultimately the person that's taking advantage of people is the developer, right? They are the ones that split this.
In what Mr. Johnson provided, yeah, that's definitely from what I'm seeing right here, without not knowing any background information, yeah, this looks like a developer either didn't know the rules or chose to ignore the rules, and then did that. With the smaller kind of postage stamp properties that have been popping up, the sliver properties and things of that nature that have been popping up, if someone wants to sell a piece of land, you can sell your property. This is more along the lines of, you're going to sell your property, this, a massive investment. You need to make sure that people are aware of the restrictions on it. And even though that's what there's a stamp on that most surveys I've seen said, it says, may be subject to all covenants, restrictions, zoning regulations, et cetera, on there. But that's boilerplate that you see everywhere else. The ones that I've seen come from Pickens County, Greenville County, other areas are much more, you're not going to miss it. It's like a big do not remove tag on them. They're very
I think the
there.
buyer should absorb some responsibility, but if they don't even know to ask the questions, this at least gives them the opportunity to do a little research and say, what do these things mean, whatever. And ask council to make a step towards at least protecting the consumer.
that's football.
Okay, your motion is if they're gonna take this out,
No, my motion is that they might amend it, that they not fully remove it, that they amend it to remove the burden from the surveyor or the developer, but leave the wording in that protects the consumer, the unknowing consumer.
Meaning put a period after the word permit and removing the
That
rest of the
sounds good.
sentence.
Your suggestion sounded excellent to me, if that is in fact what it does, is take the burden off of. It simply is a flashing red light that says, think about this before you spend this money. Look into this before you spend this money.
who puts this information on the plat?
A surveyor would create a plat and put information on a plat, and a surveyor looks at any setback requirements to include those on the plat. If you wanted to subdivide your property, surveyor says from what tree to what tree, and then if it's in a subdivision, they're going to look and see what kind of setbacks, or if it's in an area where setback requirements would apply under our zoning, they would put those setbacks in there. Now, in doing so, that's the extent of their obligation, as I understand it, and I'm not a surveyor. And I don't know that they would do this every time, or could do this every time, or could knowingly have it.
Again, that's putting the onus back on the surveyor. You know, you just don't know what people are gonna build. I mean, you know, I have people, I walk lots with people all the time. They bought it, and it's like, oh, we wanna put a 5,000 square foot house on a half acre lot with a 7-bedroom septic system. It's not gonna fit.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, what do you mean it's not gonna fit? You know, so we can't protect and fix everything. I mean, you know, I don't know what the answer is, but, you know, to sit there and make it the surveyor's responsibility to know what somebody's gonna build, you know, they're gonna buy it, you know, this year and build in 4 years.
He doesn't have to know that, though, you're just simply saying, this simply asks them to to look at the lot, learn the details of the lot, and then think about what they want to build before they buy it. If you're gonna sell somebody a piece of property, you would show them the surveyor's map. Yeah, I'm sure it wouldn't be highlighted and all that sort of stuff, right? But
We actually go through all that detail, yes.
And so, at the bottom, if it said, must be accompanied by the following, you know, lots depicted on this plat may not be eligible for connection to a sanitary sewer or septic. If it said that, it doesn't say anything about you gotta combine it with this one next door, you gotta do this, you gotta do that. It just says it may not be. Reading that, at least they're gonna say, well, what does it take to have a septic tank? Well, what do I have to have for a certificate of occupancy? I'm just saying, give them, as a teacher, you have to give them details to build a foundation. Give them enough information that they ask a question that says, can I build here? I mean, obviously you can't build a 5,000 square foot home there, but you might think that you could build a tiny home and then say, I can get my driveway out right there because it's a tiny home. But do they need to ask those questions?
I will tell you, those are things that I look for and answer before they've asked. But as far as
But not
property,
everyone does.
not everyone does. And as far as property, the buyer does not know at all. Unfortunately, the surveyor,
I mean, he doesn't come
know either.
until
He
the
doesn't
end
know
of the
until he gets
ballgame.
ready, right,
Right, I mean.
as
we're
to
gonna
what
get-
somebody may or may not build, and that's the problem.
And the only thing he's doing is a boundary survey.
Correct. So
I don't know.
unfortunately, it really falls back to either the developer's ability to go through and truly look at what they're selling, the planning department looking at a subdivision and seeing what the developer is doing, or the buyer.
If we do this on lots that are surveyed going forward, they've still got no protection for the 100,000 or so lots in
Right, so-
Oconee County that are already surveyed.
Well, I
Because if they're
mean,
paying cash, they don't have to have another survey, right? It's not
they don't have
required.
to have another survey anyway.
If they, usually if it's
Not
being
necessarily.
financed, they
Nope.
don't have to have a new survey
Nope.
in their name?
I mean, again, I'm a proponent for buyer's agency. That's why everybody should have a realtor, is to help protect them from these things.
And
But,
they should have a builder look at it before they buy it.
but beside that, a buyer's on their own. And these are real situations, but I don't know that the surveyor has the ability to fix it.
Maybe I should withdraw my motion.
Well, what if, instead of putting something on the plat, if we give a general warning to any purchaser to check, to see if it is buildable?
Well, that,
Somebody has to do
anybody
that.
can write a contract, buy a lot, and say, I need 30 days due diligence. And the buyer and seller can agree or not agree. I mean, that's done all the time. 60 days due diligence, to where they have time to find out. I've walked lake lots with people, and I said, well, here's a septic. What do you mean septic? We're not hooking up to a sewer? People don't know, and you can't fix that. And
Mr. Chairman?
and again, it's not up to the county to fix that.
It's not our job to educate people, I don't guess. I mean, even though I'm like you, I don't want
Yeah.
anybody to be taken
No, I
advantage
don't-
of,
yeah.
but that's not our job.
They won't buy another one.
Just briefly, to Mr. Gramling's point, that's what Adam and I were chatting about. This is really going forward, and a lot of the lots that may be problematic for folks have already been platted. They're recorded at the Register of Deeds office. And so what this may capture could be captured otherwise if the Register of Deeds office is ensuring that plats are approved before they're recorded, which they're doing a good job at, and the planning department approves subdivision plats appropriately. And there are issues that certainly could go with this, not only the extra work for the surveyor that wouldn't be part of what they buy in for, but I guess one example I think of is we require them to put this language on there, but it is a very buildable lot. But this language has a deterrent effect for later selling that property. That could be something that floats back to the surveyor, to the seller, and the county has created that problem for them when perhaps we ought not to have. And that's one concern I have for the county's liability. I think it's a great idea because it's good to give the buyers a warning, but they're warned because everybody's imputed with knowledge of the law, whether they read it or not. You're supposed to know it. You're supposed to know when you're in 55 mile an hour speed limit zone. You're supposed to know what our setbacks are. So I'm not trying to be harsh with that, but I've seen all the arguments just from a purely legal standpoint and being a little bit selfish from the county standpoint about thinking how this could come back. I mean, I see the reasonableness of jettisoning this language.
So do we need to simply say something back to council then saying we're in agreement that this should be removed? What's our step?
If that's y'all's stance, then yeah, that's all you need to do.
I make the motion, we send it back, omitting amendment 2.
I'll second.
I second.
And we'll let Mr. Root explain why to county council. However you worded that.
Yeah,
No,
yeah,
I mean,
you're
no, I agree 100% with,
Yeah.
with Mr. Root.
Okay, we have a motion and a second.
It doesn't matter who's.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Just send this back to council saying, okay. Basically.
Agreement with them.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay. Any old business? Any new business? Do I hear the words,
Let's adjourn.
all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, gentlemen and ladies.
I appreciate the opportunity to plug